Greetings, methodology students. I hope this finds you well, and welcome to week one. I thought in this first introductory video that I would share with you some of my thoughts about this course, how I'm thinking about it, and why I think it's so important for us. An important part of graduate school in studying art history is to be initiated into the guild, the discipline of academic art history. It's really what it's about. The diversity of this program, given its specificity as an online program, as one that is that has a particular focus for students, often adult students, teachers, and educators who are deepening their understanding of art that is going to help them in the classroom and help them perhaps reorient their direction towards achieving greater educational expertise in the arts for a career in the arts. But ultimately, the program itself, what it means to do art history, is not just to write about art or to talk about art. It's to think about it and study it in a particular way. And that particular way is what methodologies and what the methodologies course is providing you the tools for being able to understand self-reflectively what it is you're doing. So the question of what is art history has to exist in relationship to other questions. What is aesthetics? What is philosophy? What is art criticism? All of those questions, what is theory? All of those questions can make use of a painting, can make use of a work of art, can talk about a work of art, can do what they do through a work of art. But the question is it all art history? And in fact, we can broaden the question because, or we can broaden that scope because Freud, in several of his books, focuses on artists. Michelangelo and Leonardo, for example, uses works of art as means by which he reflects on the self. Sociologists, cultural historians, anthropologists, sociologists are all doing their discipline and often making reference to works of art. But is simply making a reference to works of art or talking about works of art history? So this is one of the questions that we'll have to explore throughout this class. What is art history? And does it have a singular essence? Did art history descend from the heavens like manna onto the fields? Or does it exist as this ideal entity? Or is it, as I will suggest to you and as you will see revealed throughout this class, it's a historical practice. It shifts and develops. That there are ways of, and particularly in terms of studying its origins, and as I will suggest to you, these origins are modern. They are born of thought, intellectual development after the Reformation, after the Enlightenment. It is an expression of how human reason is in search of truth. And it does have implicit theological and religious implications, given the fact that the Enlightenment itself was emerged from a context in which faith and faith in God and the religious expression of faith in God was something that was set aside, not necessarily thrown away, but bracketed, set aside. Then at the realm of the human sciences, the study of human culture and society, of human action and agency and human thought, is something that was limited to human reason. And whatever it was, however we understood God was a subject or was an expression of faith, and that faith was different than the exertion of reason. So we'll explore that, and you'll get a taste of art history as an enlightenment intellectual practice, as a post-Kantian mode of thinking. And how it relates to the other disciplines, and how it emerged out of other disciplines. That art history itself as a modern discipline develops from archaeology, from anthropology, sociology. And yet those are even modern disciplines, shaped by the modern ethos of understanding the human being in relationship to him or herself, the world outside him or herself, including the world of culture and nature, and God, or whatever it is is the lawgiver, or to whom we are accountable. Another important component is that art history has origins not only in the modern post-Kantian intellectual history, but it's also Western then. Particular questions that are Western questions, Western European questions. Questions born in England and France and in Germany. So we could say not all writing about art or talking about art qualifies as art history. But it doesn't mean it's interesting. It doesn't mean it reveals certain aspects about the work of art. And more often than not, art history as a discipline, as we will see, as an evolving discipline that is always drawing off, interacting with, participating in, being influenced by other realms of thought, is constantly shifting and changing. So an important dimension of art history as an academic discipline is that it's an historical discipline. It thinks historically. It thinks about the art of the past, in a particularly rigorous historical way. And that rigorous historical way means that the historian brackets, suspends his or her own personal perspectives, brackets her subjectivity. The subjectivity will play a role in it, and you will see this with some of the readings, James Elkin's PDF that I provide for you. It's also fascinating, and I also want an option for your final paper is to do is to write an essay on an art historian. Their biography, what motivates them, what interests them, how they became art historians, and then how they go about doing art history is unique to them and distinctive to them, and it's quite subjective. Yet within the context of their argumentation, within the context of creating, of developing and producing research and scholarship that then goes out into public and is subject to critique. This aspect of an objectivity and thinking about what objectivity means in historical thinking is important, and that shifts also. And that shifts and changes depending upon the development philosophical thought. And certainly, over the last two or three generations, the historian's objectivity has taken on a different flavor. That the historian's subjectivity, their ideological biases, their racial, gender, sexual biases, how they are positioned, particularly in the global matrix, has something important to do with how we understand the results of their scholarship. And yet, there are particular parameters and questions that can be asked, or are asked, that are more objective than others. What are those questions? How does the discipline provide a context in which those questions then can be subjected to critique and argumentation and further discourse, rather than just expressing an opinion that I have, or to offer a particularly creative and poetic reading of a painting? One way you can begin to think about the distinction between art criticism and art history is that the art critic approaches the work of art, and her primary focus is to articulate the impact that work of art has on them. And they can make use of history and psychology and philosophy and theology and etc., etc. And yet, ultimately, what they are doing is articulating the working, the mechanism of that work of art as it's doing what a work of art is intending to do in front of a person standing there. What you could say that the artist is making a work of art for a person standing in front of the work of art, in which the art critic is just a more intense and an articulate manifestation of that intended audience. But I would suggest to you that the artist is not making works of art for art historians, and that the presupposition for an art historian is not that the work of art is speaking necessarily to the art historian in the present, but that the work of art is a historical document, an artifact, that needs somehow to be resuscitated through asking historical questions and putting the work of art not in celebrating and embracing the work of art as it is confronting them in the historian's present, but in the historian going back into or recontextualizing that painting or that work of art in a historical context. What historical context is? There are infinite historical contexts. But simply by that gesture, that distinction of gesture between the art critic and the art historian, is already giving us a particular way of showing us that writing about and thinking about art has certain distinctions and differences. And that certainly doesn't mean that they're airtight, and they're not airtight, and they are not self-contained. Or within the context of aesthetics, the questions that are asked of aestheticians are philosophical questions on the work of art's relationship to beauty, on art as a particular kind of philosophical entity, which is often different than art as an historical entity. Another aspect that thinking self-reflectively about art history brings up is the question of historiography. That is, the study of how history is made. The study of historians doing history. And history, writing history, is a particular kind of storytelling. Now, in ancient histories and ancient annals, you could say even before, before the modern era, historians told stories. They told stories of the past for particular reasons in the present. The relationship between history and mythology was often indistinguishable. And oftentimes what the historian was doing was taking mythology, these universal archetypical stories, and giving them an historical context. So Constantine, Charlemagne, Marcus Aurelius, Julius Caesar take on a mythic status as a way of articulating the historical significance. But the question of whether we say, did Julius Caesar actually do this? Or, to put this in the context of biblical studies, did Jesus do this? So you have this very interesting phenomenon in the 19th century, which is the century of the rise of history as a historical discipline, as an intellectual discipline. The question of, who is this historical Jesus? Sure, the gospel writers wrote from a particular perspective. They believed that Jesus was the Messiah. He died on the cross, rose again. He resurrected people from the dead. He changed water into wine, fed the 5,000. But is that the Jesus of history? Can we prove that the Jesus of history existed? Those are the kinds of historical questions. And then how we understand that. What is the relationship of the mythical Jesus or the biblical Jesus and the historical Jesus? Usually scholars will say the Christ of faith and the Jesus of history. Can those distinctions be made? And the question is, ultimately, is that these issues are always under contestation and argument. They're not settled. There isn't a right answer. And in this class, like every other class you're taking in this program, you're not getting answers. And if you're approaching it for finding answers, it's frustrating. It can be frustrating. What this course is offering are questions, posing problems. And your role as a thinker, as a scholar, is to think through those questions, pose those questions in ways that allow you to go about in your own way to answer them. And so the methodologies class can often be just simply, what's the latest theory that I apply to art? And that's not what we want to look at in this class. I want to put the theoretical innovations, the theoretical developments that we often think about theory. We're thinking about philosophical thought that took place after 1968 with structuralism and deconstruction, Roland Barthes and Derrida and Foucault and Jacques Lacan. We want to put that in a historical context, and ultimately what the map we are presenting is art history is a particular way of thinking about and writing about art. And I also think it's important that we humanize that we're looking at art historians as human beings that try as they might and presenting work, their scholarship that is trying to get at the truth in the past, they are often doing a lot of revealing about who they are. And that doesn't undermine the value of their work as art history. It gives it humanity. So I hope these comments are helpful to you. And what I hope to do each week is to come to you with with a 15 or 20-minute video that just sets a stage, gives a certain reflection on the readings, and I'm very much looking forward to this class. This is the first time I've taught this course, so we're on this journey together in a very literal way. But my entire career as an art historian has been consumed with thinking about the methods, the historiography, what it means to do art history. Oftentimes because I'm finding myself doing all kinds of other things. What are my curatorial activities in relationship to being an academic art historian? Are my writings about art and theology, or art and religion? Or when I write as a critic? So I hope these comments are helpful. Looking forward to our 8-week sprint. Take care.